the good old summertime, in the good old summertime.
So let's actually discuss the tour, Rick. The Australians left shore in late January for the 4-day trip on the ship to Auckland. How many matches were scheduled and how tight was the itinerary?
Okay, so originally, there was originally 15 matches, but that got amended to 16. They added a second game in Wellington.
Mm-hmm.
This took place over the space of 7 or 8 weeks, over February and March. So it was a very tight trip. You know, they were basically playing twice a week. That was what it came down to, twice a week for the whole period. So there's 16 matches, and there were 8 first-class matches on the tour, which the Australians won 6 and drew 2. So you'd get,
Mm-hmm.
you know, the first-class matches interspersed with matches against second-tier sides around the country, but 15s, 8s, 15s, 16s, or 18s in the other 8 matches. The big games, interesting, I didn't realize until right at the end, whatever happened, Australia batted second. They never batted first. The point being was, in these important first-class matches, the intention was that Australia would bat on the Saturday.
Yeah.
That was always the intention. The obvious reason, biggest gate possible when Australia batted. So it was a slight strange twist. No matter what happened with the toss,
yeah,
Australia were batting on the Saturday. That was, and that actually happened, of course, with the famous stand, the 8th-wicket stand. Trumper was held back on the Friday after they bowled Canterbury out on the Friday. They held Trumper back, and he didn't bat until Saturday. So, but it was pretty arduous tour. I mean, the railway network in New Zealand was was expanding, but there were still some pretty tough journeys by coach. Stage, you know, with 4 horses pulling a stagecoach sort of thing across quite difficult roads, which took considerable time, plus some, ferry and sea trips on top. So it was a bit reminiscent of some of those tours in the 1880s and 90s that the England teams undertook around Australia, you know. But there was a growing rail network that made a lot of the trips much more manageable.
Your comparison is very apt. I mean, it makes the whole journey seem quite, not primitive, that's not the right word, but that they're just getting by and that they're having to rough it a little in parts. And then, that, you know, it must have been an adventure for them as well, especially the younger players
Absolutely.
on tour who hadn't yet done, say, a bigger tour to England. So, Rick, if we were to go chronologically through the tour, we'll just pinpoint some of the more memorable matches. So the first match was against Auckland on the 6th of February, and the Australians won handsomely by an innings and 221 runs, with centuries to Armstrong, Ransford and Waddy. Now, despite the Australian team containing Armstrong and Monty Noble, 2 very senior players, the team was captained by Arthur Sims, wasn't it? What can you tell us about that dynamic?
Yeah, Arthur Sims was captain of the side. Noble obviously could have been captain if he'd wanted to be, but he wanted Sims to be captain of the side. He thought it was appropriate that Sims should captain the side, and that's what happened. Although, you know, Sims didn't play in every match, and Noble would captain in the absence. And I'm sure if Sims wanted any advice, there were Noble and Armstrong to give him advice. I mean, there were times when Noble and Sims didn't play. There's one match where Trumper was captain, which is interesting because he was so shy and reluctant. He obviously at that point, because every match had dinners and functions and events. You know, it was such a team was, you know, fated everywhere it went. Trumper had to actually make a speech on that occasion, which I'm sure he hated. But yes, Sims was given the captaincy, But he'd captained Canterbury and New Zealand, so it wasn't that he wasn't capable. On the contrary, he was in. If you read his memoir, there's a biography of Arthur Sims, which has a few pages on his tour. He said, "Not noble, great captain, fantastic man, but he liked to go to bed too late and get up too late." He was and Sims is quite funny with some comments. For some reason, he called Cody and Collins the blue ferret and the red ferret. No idea why.
Right.
There were strange names that he called people, but the fact that Noble stayed up too late and stayed in bed too late was a comment Sims made about him, which maybe he felt maybe it'd be better off if he was capturing the side as well. That match in Auckland's odd because, of course, Trumper wasn't there and neither was Crawford.
No.
And that's the one match where Bill McCall, who was the assistant manager, played.
Right.
Batted number 11 and got a duck and bowled 1 or 2 overs. So that was really the only time they were short. But they won comfortably anyway.
They did, yes, an innings and 221 runs. So as you just alluded, Trumper wasn't there and he arrives in time for the 4th match of the tour, which is at the Basin Reserve in Wellington. And this is where he makes his first appearance, which must have been a draw card. What do we know about Trumper's performance? How did he fare in his first outing on tour?
I mean, it's hard to say that Trumper was rusty, but he got a duck, basically.
Right.
And in the first innings, Australia's first innings, they were bowled out for 124. They obviously went on to win the match, but Trumper got a duck in the first innings and was batting reasonably in the second, and the crowd was enjoying it, but then he got out then, much to the disappointment of the crowd. In Australia's first innings, they were bowled out by the spin attack of Jack Saunders, Clary Grimmett, and a New Zealand bowler called Tom Southall, who took 5 wickets. So that was quite an interesting situation, but he couldn't repeat it in the second innings, and Australia won quite easily. The crowd must have been very disappointed with the Trumper on that,
Oh, yes.
At Wellington on that occasion for sure.
Well, I mean, cricket's a lottery, isn't it? I mean, you could see Trumper score a duck or he could score 293. It's just, absolutely whatever day it is, you just have to hope for the best from a crowd perspective.
Absolutely.
So the 6th match of the tour, it's scheduled against, I love this name, Poverty Bay in Gisborne. And it's an interesting match because of the negotiations which take place between the local team and Frank Laver, who's serving as this manager. The locals wanted to field a team of 22 players, which is a real throwback to sort of the 19th century tours. Their rationale was so as many players as possible could benefit or learn from playing against the Australians. And Laver said, no, the best we could do is 18, and I think the haggling progressed and eventually they settled on 11 per side, traditional 11. So what else can you tell us about this match against Poverty Bay, which I believe includes a humorous arrival of the Australian team in Gisborne?
This is one of the matches where there was quite a long journey to get there, and they travelled overnight on an overnight ferry. The local cricket association, like all the local cricket associations, were super keen to meet the players as soon as possible, have a function, and so they get on the ferry to greet the Australian players who are still in bed and forced to get up in their pajamas to meet these meet the local cricket association. Later in the morning, they had another function at the town hall, but the match itself is interesting, I think, just from one other point of view, and that is it's the captain of the local side is Len McMahon, who'd played for North Sydney for quite a number of years, was on the fringe of the North Sydney first grade side, had played in the second grade North Sydney side, which won the pennant or whatever it was that they played for. He got 87 not out, and there was clamorings for him to be included in the test inverted commas side, which didn't happen in the first test. It did in the second. But that's, throughout New Zealand, there were one or two players who'd got an Australian background who the team came up against. McMahon being one of the most notable.
Did he run? 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 He ran to Lincoln where he started to train. For in 4 more years he would run again.
If you're enjoying this podcast, perhaps you'd like to support it by buying me, Tom Ford, a coffee. Every little donation helps with the production costs and also inspire me to keep going. You can support by donating as little as $5. Visit buymeacoffee.com/Golden Age of Cricket. Well, moving along to the next match, or not the next match, sorry, the 8th match on tour is against Canterbury. And it is remembered basically for one huge partnership, and we've mentioned it already, but it is that world record 8th-wicket partnership between Victor Trumper and Arthur Sims. The partnership is 433 runs. So, the Canterbury crowd definitely got their money's worth that day. You've already mentioned a bit about Trumper's performance, but what else can you tell us about? I believe that all unfolded on the second day's play. Is that right, Rick?
Yeah, as you were saying, they held Trumper back because that's to get the biggest possible gate on the Saturday. In terms of the performance, I mean, it was just an amazing performance. I think the best I can do is just read you a few extracts from a New Zealand paper called Press, which headlined "Peerless Batting by Trumper. Those who went to Lancaster Park on Saturday got the cricket feast of a lifetime. There were probably very few in that big crowd who had ever seen anything like it, and doubtless the great majority will never see its equal again. There is only one Trumper in the world, and after watching him for over 3 hours execute his magic-like strokes all around the wicket, one would subscribe enthusiastically to the sentiment conveyed in his being styled the incomparable Victor. Talk about the champagne of cricket. It was all that, with an electric sparkle running through it all the way. One might enthuse over it to the extent of columns and yet not be guilty of exaggeration. I mean, that was their opening paragraph.
Right.
It goes on. I won't read any, but it does go on. I mean, the scoring rate was phenomenal. Trumper scored his first 50 in 26 minutes, 100 in an hour and 13, 150 an hour and 32 minutes, 200 in 2 hours 11, and so on. And the whole innings of 293 was 3 hours and 10 minutes. He gave one chance, this paper said, at 251, and another one a few runs later. Some papers claim he gave a chance at 116, and that he admitted that he was given not out, by the way.
Right.
But they claim he admitted he was out. But the paper concludes, one might feel tempted to compliment the umpire on a mistake that resulted in such a delightful cricket being seen afterwards. So even, the umpire was wanting to keep him in. Joe Bennett, who was the best New Zealand medium fast bowler at the time, always claimed to his dying day, he swore, he had Trump out at 7.
Right.
But he wasn't given out. So, I mean, that's just as well. Of course, Sims made 184 not out, which was, I think, the highest score to that point in New Zealand. One of the great things that we found, I think I may have mentioned earlier, is the photograph of Trumper and Sims batting. It was in a book of photographs given to Charlie Clark, who was a New Zealand cricket administrator. And there you can see, it's clearly Trumper because Sims is wearing his hooped cap. He had a very distinctive cap. The sight screen are just cloth, basically. There's quite a big crowd around the ground, and you can see the scoreboard. The the scoreboard, after which it's clearly the right score, because there's that very famous photograph of Trumper and Sims standing in front of the scoreboard, which is the most,
Yes.
up until now, the most well-known photograph of that particular performance. But incredible performance.
As good as Trumper was, there must be was there some blame levelled at the Canterbury bowlers? I mean, were they just not up to scratch that day, or was this just everything working for these two particular batsmen, do you think?
I think it's the latter. I mean, Canterbury had a decent bowling attack, led primarily by Joe Bennett, who was a bowler good enough to he actually went to England at one point to try and get work as a professional bowler there, and it fell through. I think it was Worcestershire who promised him opportunity. I mean, he was a really good medium pace bowler, putting it on the spot all the time. And his figures in that match aren't, I think he got 5 for something, No, I don't think you can put it down to, poor performances or particularly poor field out. It was just one of those incredible days, one of those incredible performances by Trumper.
And it is another one of those golden age innings, which is so peculiar because of where he is in the batting lineup. I mean, you mentioned earlier it's because he was held back to maximise gate receipts, but there's other instances in golden age innings of because of a sticky wicket. That was often why the likes of Trumper and Clem Hill were held back to be the better batsman as the wicket was doing a lot. You just don't see it today.
There's that very famous example of Reggie Duff made his debut for Australia. He batted at number 10, and scored 104 not out.
Yes. On debut, I think.
On debut, and that was for just the reasons you suggest. It was to the benefit of the Canterbury Cowboys, that manufactured situation.
So it seems like Trumper is finally sort of warming to the tour in terms of form, because in the 9th match of the tour he scores another century, not as large, but it's against South Canterbury. Before the Australians encounter the first of 2 tests, and these tests are in inverted commas because they're played between Australia and a sort of a representative New Zealand side, but they're not actually official tests. You won't see them in the record books as tests, but they were called as much. Can you just explain a little about that situation and, these so-called tests, but also how representative of New Zealand was this so-called test side?
It's also just worth mentioning when Trumper scored that century against South Canterbury. That was the game where Jack Crawford scored 354 in 193 minutes. I mean,
yes,
that was the biggest. Okay, so this isn't a first-class match, but nonetheless, 354 in 193 minutes. It's the largest score ever made in New Zealand up to that point.
Yeah.
Yes. So the difficulty with the New Zealand sides, obviously, they didn't have test status at this point anyway, but because of the geographical distances and the difficulties of people getting time off work and traveling and so forth, but the 2 sides in the 2 New Zealand sides in the 2 tests in inverted commas were slightly different as to whether the players from Auckland could travel or whether the players from Canterbury could travel. So truly representative, probably reasonably representative, but yes, you could, if you could, with all the best will in the world, put the best 11 players together, they probably wouldn't have matched either of those 2 sides. But, Joe Bennett played in both games. Dan Rees played in the first game, was unable to play in the second, not for those reasons, because he was ill. Yeah, so they were decent sides, but you make a fair point. They weren't truly representative, but they were close to.
Yeah, sure. And so there were 2 of these so-called tests scheduled for the tour. The first one happens in Dunedin, and the second one is then in between a few more just tour matches. The second one is back in Auckland at Eden Park, and it is perhaps best remembered for being Trumper's final first-class match. So that is a good enough point or reason to ask you how he fared in that so-called second test match.
Well, he got 81, which you think, oh, it's a reasonable score, but he's completely overshadowed because Australia made 610 and won by an innings. And in Australia's innings, Waddy, Garwaddy, Doling, Armstrong, and Crawford all scored hundreds. So because no one knew this was going to be Trumper's last match, last first-class match, it just, passed by because of the dominance of the Australian side and those 4 centuries. It was his 81 was somewhat overshadowed. In the end, I think he was at LBW to Snedden, who of course is what the Snedden is. That's became one of the great New Zealand cricket families. The Sneddons. But yeah, that was a very convincing win for the Australians in that game.
Yeah, and what a feather in your cap for posterity, being the bowler who dismissed Trumper in his final first-class match. It's almost like a pub trivia question, but I'm not sure if Snedden dined out on that for many years afterwards.
And it's waiting.
So, Rick, in your book, of course, you lay out a tour summary with all the statistics. So I thought we could just go over them now. And I've had to, as you do in your book, I've split them out. At this point in time, you've mentioned on numerous occasions how the tour included both first-class matches, but also just general matches that weren't deemed first-class. So I'll break it up into all matches and first-class matches. So when it comes to all matches, perhaps not surprising, Trumper scored the most runs for the Australians, despite him arriving late. So he scored a total of 1,246 runs across 15 innings, and his average was 83.6. The 2 next best were Warwick Armstrong, who scored 728. That was across 17 matches. He was left with an average of 52.7. Slightly higher average, but probably due to that gigantic score, Jack Crawford scored 624 runs across just 9 innings, and his average was 69.3. In the bowling stakes for all matches, basically one name stands out in terms of, everything, and that's Warwick Armstrong. We know he liked to dominate. So he took 89 wickets on tour, and he bowled 485 overs, which when you look at, that doesn't really mean anything, but when you look at the number of overs all the other bowlers performed, it absolutely dwarfs them. He didn't have the best average, but I think that's just natural due to probably how many overs and runs he gave away. But some of the other bowlers, Mackenzie, Collins, even Ransford, they all took, 18, 16, 17 wickets. So Armstrong's 89 wickets really does dominate that tour. If we then break it up into first-class statistics, it's a similar-ish tale. So Trumper, he played 7 first-class matches, batted 9 times. He scored 628 first-class runs. His highest score was that gigantic 293, and he was left with a 69.77 average. He was just pipped in terms of average. So Ransford scored 283 runs, had a not out thrown in there, but his average was 70.75 across just...
Remember, Ransford had to go back to Melbourne about halfway through the tour for business reasons, the family business he needed to go back for. So that's why he played fewer matches.
Yeah. Armstrong, again, we know he's this all-rounder, so he scores 441 runs in the first-class matches, plays a similar number to Trumper, and his average is 63. So despite his late arrival, Trumper is up there, definitely. And looking at the first-class bowling statistics, again, as you'd expect, Armstrong dominates. 307 overs. He took 52 wickets, costing 789 runs at an average of 15.17. Monty Noble appears. We haven't really heard about Monty Noble's performances, but he took 18 first-class wickets at an average of 17.66. So that's just an overview of some of the numbers. Cricket can be a game of numbers, so I just thought I'd lay them out. So, Rick, as we near the end, really keen to know, hearing what you said at the beginning about coming to this tour not knowing too much, and then, apart from the basic stuff, how you now view this 1914 tour to New Zealand by the Australians and what its legacy should be. Monty Noble was on record afterwards as saying he hoped that the visit would help educate the players and spectators about cricketing standards. What are your thoughts about the legacy of this tour?
Well, I mean, the crowds that it attracted were substantial, and so it certainly would have helped promote the game. And it helped promote the game not in sort of Auckland, Christchurch, and Wellington, where the game was well established, but because the tour took in every places like Gisborne, Poverty Bay, Temuka, lots of Wanganui. They travelled the breadth and width of New Zealand. I mean, so it's certain in every town they went to, there was functions and mayoral receptions. Some places there was half-day closing, the shops shut so people could go to the game. There'd be special trains put on so that people could get to the games in the country areas. So it was obviously a phenomenon, and it got tremendous newspaper coverage as well. So in terms of popularizing the game still further, it was definitely important. I suppose what's noticeable about quite a lot of the comments at receptions and so forth is it was, because, I mean, while the war obviously hadn't been declared, there was rumblings, in Europe. So there were comments about, building and cementing the empire and so forth. So that was a common theme of that. In terms of cricket itself, Noble and other players who spoke about, again, commented on Maley as well, that the wickets were too slow. Noble or Armstrong at some point suggested they should import Buller soil to try and speed the wickets up. I don't think that ever happened.
Right.
I think the other big issue, of course, was the New Zealand Cricket Council lost money on it all, although they seemed to be fairly accepting of this fact. But they and the associations lost money on putting this tour together. Sims didn't obviously make much money out of it either, but I think some money went to the players as a consequence. The other big legacy, I think, is the total failure of the Australian board and MCC to promote cricket in New Zealand. It's interesting. In 1930, we found a letter was sold in a recent auction in Australia that we bought. A letter from Arthur Sims in 1930 to Clary Grimmett asking him to go on a tour of New Zealand that Sims and Maley were organising. The New Zealand Cricket Council wanted a short tour by Australian players before New Zealand went to England to play in 1931, I think it was. And the Australian board said no. They said, the players were too tired. They weren't, they couldn't undertake this tour. New Zealand was pretty annoyed, and all the more so because as soon as the Australian season ended, and that's when the New Zealand Council wanted players to go, a whole load of players went on tours around Queensland on junket type tours, including Bradman. So what did the legacy? It's taken a long time for the Australian board and the MCC to really help promote cricket in New Zealand. That's for me one of the most damning legacies of the tour. The tour itself did great work, in terms of promoting cricket in New Zealand. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, and the elephant in the room, I suppose I could say, is that this tour ends on the doorstep of the outbreak of the Great War, which kindles over the next few months. And we know that many of the planned Australian tours for the next few years had to be cancelled, obviously. What can we say about the effect of the First World War having on the progress of New Zealand cricket?
Yeah, on New Zealand cricket, it was quite stark, I suppose. New Zealand stopped playing cricket much sooner than cricket in Australia. Australia continued, as far as I understand, to play grade cricket or grade matches throughout the First World War, although the Sheffield Shield didn't continue after 14-15. In New Zealand, I'm pretty sure everything got cancelled, and a lot of New Zealand cricketers went to serve in the First World War overseas, and two of them who'd played in the Test in inverted commas against Australia, Hickmott and Wilson, George Wilson, were both killed in Europe and are buried there. So, it did affect cricket in New Zealand in that terms of deaths and injuries, and I suppose it also, the war ended the careers of some of the others, like Dan Rees didn't play on and so on. So
Yes.
yeah, it definitely hampered cricket in New Zealand, and the fact that once the war ended, the focus, I suppose, on the cricket world was getting Australia and England matches, the AIF tours,
Yes.
and then followed by the England-Australia Ashes series of 2021 and so on.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And well, Ric, thank you very much for being my guest today. It is
It was a pleasure.
utterly fascinating book, both from what I learned about the tour, but also pictorially just splendid. The book is called Trumper Across the Tasman, the 1914 Australian Tour of New Zealand. And I believe there are still some copies available in the UK from Boundary Books, and in Australia here, Roger Page might be able to sort you out. It's a real collector's item, and I would encourage my listeners to seek it out because it's both visually stunning and educational, I think is the word. So well done to you, Ric and Peter, and I wish the book all the best. So yeah, thanks again.
Thanks, Tom. Much appreciated.
And that's all from me, Tom Ford. Thanks for your company, and until next time, it's bye for now.